My name is Nora Vasquez. I'm 31 years old. And the Easter afternoon my sister-in-law raised a glass to my replacement was when I finally understood that a seat at the table means nothing if the table runs on your money and your name is never said out loud. The toast came at 1:47 p.m. between the lamb and the salad course, while 23 people sat around the long folding tables Renata had pushed together in her dining room and her mother's adjoining one. She stood, clinked her fork against her water glass, and said, "To the family we actually chose, because some people choose themselves instead." Everyone raised their glass. My husband's aunt laughed warmly. Two cousins I had known for 7 years clinked without looking up. My mother-in-law, seated directly across from me, raised her glass and held eye contact with Renata for a moment that meant something I was meant to understand. I smiled. I raised my glass of sparkling water. I said nothing. 15 minutes later, I excused myself to the restroom at the end of the hallway, the small one with the seashell soap dish I had bought as a housewarming gift 4 years ago when Renata and her husband Marco moved into this house. I sat on the lid of the toilet. I opened my banking app. I found the recurring transfer $1,150 scheduled every first Friday of the month, labeled in my own account as MV Household, and I looked at it for a moment. It was scheduled for 4 days from now. What none of them knew, what no one at that table knew except my husband, and perhaps not even him fully, was that I had been the one keeping that household's supplemental budget intact since the month Renata and Marco's second child was born, and I had never once been introduced at a family gathering as anything other than Daniel's wife. I closed the app without canceling anything yet. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror above the seashell soap dish. Then I went back to the table and ate my salad. I need to tell you how the arrangement began because it did not begin with resentment. It began with a phone call on a Wednesday night in late autumn, 4.5 years ago, and it began with my husband's voice having the specific quality it gets when he is asking for something he is not sure he should be asking for. Daniel and I had been married for 2 years at that point. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from his family's neighborhood, and we had built a life that was, by any reasonable measure, stable. I was a senior compliance analyst at a regional financial services firm, the kind of job that is not dramatic to describe at dinner parties but that pays well and consistently and requires a level of precision that I had always found satisfying. Daniel was a project manager for a mid-sized construction company. Together, we were comfortable. Not wealthy, but the kind of comfortable where you can say yes to most things without calculating first. His family was not comfortable in that way. His parents, Greta and Phil, had retired earlier than their savings fully supported, a decision made with the optimism of people who trusted that things would work out and the quiet faith that their children would be nearby if they didn't. Marco, Renata's husband and Daniel's older brother, was in contracting seasonal work, variable income, the kind of financial life that runs well in good years and runs tight in others. Renata did not work outside the home. This was a choice she had made when their first child was born, and a choice that was entirely hers to make, and I had never had a thought about it one way or the other. The phone call that Wednesday was Daniel telling me that Marco and Renata were having a difficult month. The second baby had arrived 6 weeks early. There had been a NICU stay of 11 days. The bills from that stay, even after insurance, had produced a gap that Marco's current work cycle was not going to close. Daniel asked if we could help. I said yes. Of course I said yes. An 11-day NICU stay and a new baby and a gap in the budget. There was no version of me that said no to that. We agreed on $1,150 a month. The number came from a conversation Daniel and I had about what was meaningful without being destabilizing for our own budget. It was specific because I had done the math. I set up the transfer from my personal account, not our joint account, because the joint account had its own obligations and I did not want to complicate the tracking, and I labeled it clearly, and I told Daniel it was running. The arrangement was presented, in my own mind and in the few words we exchanged about it with Marco, as a bridge. A few months, until the billing cycle settled and Marco's work picked back up and the baby was home, and the routine was established. The baby came home in February. Marco's work picked back up in April. The billing cycle settled by June, as far as I could tell from the things Daniel mentioned in passing. The transfer continued. I did not stop it because no one asked me to stop it, and I did not raise it because I had told myself, in the specific way that people tell themselves things they do not fully examine, that I would say something when it felt right. And then another month passed, and another, and the moment when it would have been easy to raise, it quietly slipped into the past, and the moment when it would have required a more deliberate conversation arrived, and I did not have that conversation either. By the end of the first year, $1,150 a month had become simply a line in my budget.
An outgoing.
A fixed cost. The way utilities are fixed costs, present, regular, unremarkable. What was remarkable, though I did not examine it closely enough at the time, was what had happened to my position in the family during that same year. I had entered Daniel's family, with goodwill on all sides. His parents were warm to me in the specific way of people who are glad their son seems happy. Marco had shaken my hand at our first meeting with genuine friendliness. Renata had been polite, which I had taken as a foundation, not a ceiling. The ceiling announced itself gradually. By the end of our first year of marriage, I had noticed that the family group chat, a thing that existed on a platform I rarely used, seemed to generate events and plans that Daniel mentioned to me after the fact. A Sunday lunch that had been discussed in the chat while I was at work. A birthday dinner for Phil that materialized with 4 days' notice when I had already committed to something else. The assumption never stated that Daniel would tell me what was happening, and the assumption also never stated that my not being in the direct loop was natural and fine. I asked Daniel about the chat once. He added me. Within 2 weeks, the conversation volume dropped noticeably. I remained in the chat and said nothing about the drop because I was not certain it was connected, and I did not want to be the person who accused a coincidence of being a pattern. Renata's warmth toward me had a ceiling, and below the ceiling it was consistent. She was polite at every event. She asked after my work in the vague way people ask after work they don't understand and don't intend to learn. She said my name correctly and did not speak over me. But there was a quality to her attention, or the withdrawal of it, that I recognized as the specific social texture of someone who has decided, privately, that you are peripheral, and who manages that decision with enough surface pleasantness that it is very difficult to object to. Over 4 years, I watched her assemble a version of the family that centered on her household. Holidays migrated to her dining room. Planning conversations ran through her and Marco. Phil and Greta deferred to her on questions of timing and menu and who was coming. She was genuinely good at hospitality. The tables were always set well. The food was always enough. The children were managed with a competence that I acknowledged without reservation. She had built something real. I was simply not in it. What I had built, quietly and without announcement, was the financial substrate that kept part of it running. 48 transfers over 48 months. $1,150 each. A total of $55,200 moved from my account to theirs, not including 2 additional transfers. One in the second year when Marco's truck needed a repair that grounded his work schedule for 3 weeks, and one in the third year when the hot water heater failed, and the replacement cost landed in a week when 3 other things had also gone wrong. Those 2 transfers added $2,800. The total, if you were counting, was $58,000. I was counting. I had always been counting in the background the way compliance analysts count, not as a grievance, but as a practice. Because numbers are real, and real things deserve to be tracked. I had never told Renata the number. I had never told Greta or Phil. I am not certain Daniel had fully aggregated it in his mind, because Daniel is a person who processes each month separately and does not naturally run a cumulative total. He knew we sent $1,150 a month. He did not, I think, have a clear picture of what 48 months of $1,150 looked like as a single figure. I did. The year before Easter, Renata's sister Colette moved to the city. Colette was 34, recently divorced, and had 2 children of her own. She moved into a house 3 blocks from Renata and Marco. Within 2 months of her arrival, the shape of the family had rearranged itself around her. This is not, by itself, a problem. New people arrive. Configurations shift. I understand that families are not static. What I observed, with the precision I bring to things I observe carefully, was that Colette's arrival coincided with my own further marginalization, and that the 2 things were structurally connected. Colette was funny and loud in the way that fills rooms, and Renata organized around her the way she organized around things she loved, with attention and effort, and the specific generosity of someone who decides you matter. Colette's children played with Renata's children. Colette came to the family chat. Colette's opinions about where to hold Christmas were solicited and incorporated. Mine were not, but mine had not been for some time, so the delta was small. What changed was the temperature. Before Colette, Renata's treatment of me had been cool, but professionally managed. After Colette, it became, at moments, something with more edge. Not hostile. She was too socially precise for hostility. But there were comments that landed in a way she could claim was innocent, and I could not quite claim was not intentional. A reference to people who aren't really family people in a conversation about holiday preferences, her eyes moving briefly toward me before moving away. An answer to a question I'd asked that was addressed to Daniel rather than to me. A laugh at something Colette said that was fractionally too loud, fractionally too pointed, in a moment when the thing Colette had said was about someone who works too much to show up for people. I worked a great deal. This was true. I was good at my job, and I was recognized for it, and it required time, and I had never apologized for any of that. The Easter toast was not. I understood as I sat in the restroom with my phone in my hand, an isolated moment. It was a culmination. It was Renata saying aloud, in front of 23 people and with the social protection of a glass raised, what she had been saying in smaller registers for a year. And she had said it while my money was scheduled to arrive at her household in 4 days. I returned to the table. I ate the main course. I helped clear the plates when the clearing happened, which I always did because I was raised to help clear plates. I served myself a small piece of the cake Renata's mother had brought, and I said it was good, which it was. At 3:20 p.m., Daniel and I said our goodbyes. I hugged Greta. I shook Phil's hand. I said something to Marco about the food being wonderful. I did not look for Renata to say goodbye to because she was in the kitchen with Colette and 2 other women, and the conversation there was clearly self-contained. In the car, Daniel drove. I looked out the passenger window at the neighborhood moving past. He did not mention the toast. I did not mention the toast. We drove the 20 minutes home in a silence that was not hostile, but was full of things neither of us had chosen yet to name. When we got inside, I made tea. Daniel sat at the kitchen table and opened his phone. I stood at the counter while the kettle heated, and I thought about the seashell soap dish in Renata's hallway bathroom, which I had bought at a shop near our apartment on a Saturday morning before their housewarming, and which had been in that bathroom for 4 years, and which I doubted Renata remembered the origin of. I thought about 48 transfers. I thought about the toast. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water. I brought Daniel's mug to the table and set it in front of him. Then I sat down across from him and I said, in the quietest voice I have, I need to tell you something about the transfer to Marco and Renata. He looked up from his phone. I'm going to stop it, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said, which was not what I expected, and which told me something about where he had been sitting with things I had not known he was sitting with. Did you hear what she said? I asked. Yes, he said. Have you heard things like it before? He put his phone down. He looked at his mug. Not exactly like that, he said. But close. I nodded. I wrapped both hands around my own mug. I'm not doing this in anger, I said. I need you to know that. I've been thinking about the arrangement for a while, and the toast today made it clear that the terms of how I'm understood in this family don't match what I've actually been doing in this family. I'd like that to change. He said, What do you want to change? I said, I'd like to stop the transfer. And I'd like to think about what we want our relationship with Marco and Renata to look like going forward. Not tonight. But I'd like us to think about it. He said, Okay. That was the whole conversation, that first evening. It was enough. I canceled the transfer that night, after Daniel had gone to bed. I opened the banking app, found the scheduled payment, and changed the status to inactive. The last transfer had gone out the previous Friday, $1,150 on March 31st, 4 days before Easter. The next one had been set for May 2nd. I removed it from the schedule. Then I sat for a while at the kitchen table with my laptop open, and I did something I had been meaning to do for several months, which was request a meeting with my firm's senior benefits coordinator, a woman named Priscilla Tan, to discuss rebalancing my retirement contributions now that I was in a higher tax bracket. I sent the email. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. Monday morning came. I was at my desk by 8:15. At 9:03, Daniel's phone rang. I know this because he texted me at 9:07. Renata called. Didn't answer. She's called twice more. I texted back. Okay. At 11:40, Marco called Daniel directly. Daniel answered that one. He told me about it at lunch. We had taken to eating together at home some days since I'd shifted to a hybrid schedule. Marco had asked if everything was okay with the account. Daniel had said that we'd made some changes to our financial arrangements and would be in touch. Marco had said he didn't understand, and Daniel had said there wasn't much to explain. The transfer had been canceled, and they should plan accordingly. Marco had gone quiet for a moment and then said, "For how long?" Daniel had said, "Indefinitely." I looked at my husband across the kitchen table. He had handled it more cleanly than I had expected, and I told him so. He said he'd been thinking about it since the drive home from Easter, and that he'd had some things to say for a while that he hadn't said. Like what? I said. Like that my brother knew where that money was coming from, he said. And he never once said thank you to you. Not once in 4 years. I held that. It was true. Marco had thanked Daniel, in the early months, in the general way of a man thanking his brother. He had never said my name in connection with the arrangement. That's accurate, I said. Daniel nodded. He finished his lunch. We did not discuss it further that afternoon because there was not more to say yet. Renata called me directly on Wednesday. I was in a compliance review meeting, and the call went to voicemail. I listened to the message at 4 p.m. Her voice was controlled. She said she wasn't sure what was happening, and she thought there might be a misunderstanding. She said she hoped everything was okay, and that she'd love to talk. She did not mention the toast. She did not mention Easter. She said there seemed to be something with the account, and she wanted to understand. I did not call back that day. I thought about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it, and I gave myself the time to be sure. I called her back on Friday morning. She answered on the second ring. "Nora," she said. Her voice was careful. "Renata," I said. "I got your message. I'm returning your call. I wanted to talk about, there's been something with the account. The transfer has been canceled," I said. "Permanently. I should have let you know directly instead of having Marco hear it from Daniel, and I apologize for the order of that." A pause. "Can I ask why?" I had thought about this answer for 3 days. "Because the arrangement had run its course," I said. "We set it up as a bridge 4.5 years ago, and it became something open-ended, and I decided to close it." Another pause. "Is this about Easter?" "Easter clarified some things for me," I said. "Yes." The silence that followed was the kind where someone is choosing between several responses, and none of them are quite right. I heard her breath. "What I said," she began. "Renata," I said, and I kept my voice level and clear, the same voice I use when I'm walking a junior analyst through why a number doesn't reconcile. "I'm not calling to have an argument about Easter. I'm calling to confirm the transfer is canceled and to say that I'd like a little time before we see each other again. I think we both need some space to think about how we want things to go from here." "Some space," she repeated. The words had a flatness to them that I recognized as something being absorbed, something that could not be argued with because it was stated as a simple preference rather than an accusation. "Yes," I said. She did not say anything for a moment. Then, "Marco is going to need to restructure some things." "I understand," I said. "I'm sure he'll manage it." I said goodbye. I ended the call. I sat at my desk for a moment with the phone in my hand, looking out the window at the mid-morning sky over the parking structure across the street, which was not a beautiful view but was my view, and was enough. The following weeks had the particular quality of an aftermath, things settling, new shapes forming in the space where old assumptions had been. Greta called me 3 weeks after Easter. She was not calling, she said, about the money. She was calling because she had heard from Marco that there had been some difficulty, and she wanted to say that she was sorry if the family had made me feel unwelcome and that she hoped Daniel and I would still come to Phil's birthday in June. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her we would come to Phil's birthday. "What Renata said at Easter," Greta said, and her voice had the careful quality of someone navigating something they had not fully mapped. That wasn't right. I want you to know I didn't think it was right when she said it. Thank you for telling me, I said. She has a way of… Greta stopped. She loves Marco very much, and she's protective of what she's built. But she goes too far sometimes. This was the most honest thing Greta had ever said to me about her daughter-in-law. I held it carefully. I know, I said. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she had an idea of what this family looks like, and I wasn't in it. Greta was quiet for a moment. You've been very generous, she said. More generous than I knew. Marco told us, after. The amount. Your father-in-law and I… She stopped again. We didn't know. I didn't tell anyone, I said. That was my choice. But it's good that you know now. We talked for a few more minutes. When we hung up, I went back to the spreadsheet I had been working on because there was work to do, and the spreadsheet was waiting. Priscilla Tan at the benefits office met with me in the third week of May. She was efficient and specific and answered every question I brought with a clarity I found genuinely satisfying. We restructured my retirement contribution to capture the full employer match I had been partially leaving on the table, not intentionally, just because I had set it up years ago and not revisited it. The adjustment amounted to an additional $387 per month going into my retirement fund instead of out of my account towards someone else's household budget. It was not the same number, but the direction had changed. My firm's compliance division had a recognition event in June. I had led a process audit that had identified a documentation gap in one of our fund reporting lines, a gap that had not yet caused a problem but would have, and the identification of which saved the firm a material exposure. The managing director, a woman named Sandra Offit, said in the meeting that it was exactly the kind of work that didn't make noise until you understood what it had prevented, and that she wanted everyone in the room to understand what had been prevented. I sat in that meeting and listened to my name said in connection with work I had done, and I noted the specific feeling of that, which was different from the feeling of 4.5 years of transfers going out every first Friday without comment. Phil's birthday in June was the first time I had seen Renata since Easter. She was there. She spoke to me twice, once to offer me a drink when I arrived and once to say she liked my earrings. Both times she held eye contact for a beat longer than she used to, which was not an apology but was a form of acknowledgement, and I accepted it as such. Marco spoke to Daniel privately during the afternoon.
I don't know what they said.
Daniel told me afterward that Marco had said things were tight, but they were managing, and that he was sorry for not having said thank you more clearly. Daniel had said that Nora was the one to say it to, and Marco had said he knew, and Daniel had said he hoped that happened. It happened the following month, at a Sunday lunch at Greta and Phil's that Greta had organized specifically because she said, that the family needed a day that was just regular and good. Marco and I were both in the kitchen getting plates when he said, without setup, I should have said thank you to you a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't. I looked at him. He was looking at his stack of plates, not at me, which is the way people look when they are saying something they have been working up to. I know it wasn't nothing, he said. What you did? No, I agreed. It wasn't nothing. I'm sorry, he said again. Thank you for saying it, I said. We carried the plates out. Lunch was good. The afternoon was easy in the way afternoons can be when the difficult things have at least been named, even if they have not been fully resolved. It is now 8 months since Easter. I want to tell you what has and hasn't changed. The transfer has not restarted. I don't expect it to. Daniel and I have had 4 or 5 conversations spread across the summer about what we want our presence in his family to look like going forward, conversations that are ongoing and productive and that I do not need to summarize here except to say that they have been honest in a way that earlier years were not, and that honesty has its own value independent of what it produces. Renata and I are not close. I do not think we will be. What we are is something more functional than what we were. 2 people who understand each other's position more clearly now than before Easter, and who manage a shared family presence accordingly. That is not a warm outcome, but it is a real one. My retirement account balance at the end of the 3rd quarter reflected the restructured contribution and was higher than it had been at any previous quarter end. I noted this without ceremony, but I noted it. The seashell soap dish is presumably still in Renata's hallway bathroom. I bought it in good faith, and I don't need it back. What I needed back was something less tangible, a sense of my own outline, a visibility in my own life, an accounting of what I had been contributing and to whom, and whether those people understood the shape of the thing they had been standing on. They understand it now. That is what changed. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way anyone would describe as reversal or triumph. Just in the plainest, most useful way, the thing that had been invisible became visible. The people who had not counted started counting. My name is Nora Vasquez. I'm 31 years old. And what I know now that I did not fully know before that Easter afternoon is this. Generosity without acknowledgement is not a virtue. It is a habit. And habits can be changed without drama, without ultimatums, without anything louder than one transfer that does not go through on a Friday morning, because sometimes the quietest action is the one that finally makes the room go still enough to hear what was never being said. Before I go, I want to ask you something that I've been thinking about since that Sunday lunch in July, when Marco and I were standing in the kitchen, and he said he was sorry. He said it to a stack of plates. He did not look at me. And I have wondered since then what that moment felt like from the outside, because there were two other people in that kitchen, and neither of them said anything, and I have thought about what it means for an apology to happen in front of witnesses who choose to stay quiet. My question for you is this. When someone finally says the thing they should have said years earlier, in a small moment, in a room where other people are present, do you think the witnesses should say something, or does the silence of the room have its own kind of weight that matters? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. A new story comes out every week. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. And if you know someone who has been funding a room they weren't invited into, share this with them. I'll see you next time.